So I'm just going to provide you with a little bit of an understanding of client flow before we actually get into the live demo. It's important to understand this piece so that you know um, what the functions within Catalyst is like and how a client actually flows. So at the top here, you can see client information. So that means when a client contacts your agency and they haven't yet been admitted, they are at the screen of the client information screen. And once they become a registered client, that would be their first admission to the organization. But the piece that's really important is that within that admission, multiple programs can happen. And until a first program is open, the system does not see it as an active admission. So that's what this line is going down here. Client can be in multiple programs, either one at a time or simultaneously. And while that is happening, referrals can happen at any point during while they're in the programs. So they're registered to programs, terminated from programs, and then once all of the termination from the programs happen, then they're discharged from the organization. And should they recontact, you can see the line here back up at the top that becomes a second admission and the same process happens. Again, just wanted to give you an overview that's important in terms of understanding the flow within Catalyst, and that will become more clear once Laura actually gets into the demonstration. So we're going to move to that right now. You're going to see your screen change up again as Laura shares her screen and brings up Catalyst and logs into Catalyst.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Great. So hopefully you're seeing the Welcome to Catalyst login screen. I'm going to click Login, and I'll just point out a couple things from the login screen before we actually get into Catalyst. We do use this piece here off to the right as our form of communication with Catalyst users. A lot of it's directed at the Catalyst system administrators, so the people that are really responsible for administering Catalyst at the agency, but all users may benefit from these communications, and I highly recommend you keep an eye on those every time you log in. We do update these every few days or so. So just take a look and read the tweets, and if there's a link, follow the link and see what we're trying to communicate to you, because it's our way of being able to stay in touch with the users. So back to the login piece. Every user will have a unique user ID they use to log in. Generally speaking, we ask that the Catalyst system administrators set up the user ID as all lowercase and the first letter of your first name and then your last name. So in my case, mine is L. Greenlees. And then your password, again, is unique to your user ID. And then the connects number is unique to the organization, the agency. So in this case, it's a practice database that I'm using to log in, but yours would more likely be a 5-digit number, 10021 or whatnot. That is unique to your organization. As I said, those three pieces of information combined are what are your secure login. It's more than just a user ID and password. It actually has the connect number as well, so it adds to the security level of what you're using to log in. Once I type my information in, I click Login, and I'm brought to the main menu, or the home screen, if you will, of Catalyst. So I'll just point out a few things. Here on this login screen, you'll notice we're at the main menu. And then across the top, we have several different menu items we can use to navigate throughout the system. I can see here I'm logged in as myself. That's great. There are a couple of other links. I'll just point out we're not going to get into any of this, but if you are a little more advanced, or as you become more advanced, you'll want to recognize that there is a link to your e-referrals if your agency has been signed up to use the electronic referrals within Catalyst. You've got the link to your feedback for your e-referrals. There's a link to the waitlist if your agency has opted in to use the Catalyst waitlist, the electronic waitlist. There's a link to that. And then there's a link to the datus.ca website if you need it. And then all of our tweets, our Twitter account, can be found here at this link. We're hoping to include a link to our Datus campus here, so watch for that in the next few days. We've just requested that. So that's another piece that I think will be very valuable to you. That's the campus you use to actually register for today's training. We're promoting that and trying to make people aware that we are providing new trainings all the time, and that is your access to see what those are and to sign up for those.
Can you point out the help desk too, please, Laura? The
Yes,
link to that
sure,
at the top.
thank you. So if you're a CSA, you will have access to our help desk, but in addition to that, all users have access to our knowledge base. I'll just quickly click on that, and we're brought to the help desk login screen. Make it as big as I can. The non-users, so if you don't have a user ID and password to get into the help desk, can still search the knowledge base. Should I click on that, I don't need to log in. I can certainly search through the knowledge base. A really valuable tool for anybody that's new, especially because there are several knowledge base articles available to support you with using Catalyst. I'm going to just get back out of here, and I'm back to the main menu. And as Deborah pointed out, we'll be walking through the flow of entering clients into Catalyst. We're coming at it from a basic level, so we won't get into some of the more advanced modules. But hopefully by having a solid understanding of the basic flow, that'll get you going, and then you can build using different resources from there, whether they be knowledge base articles, existing Catalyst users, or the help desk if that's available to you. So the first thing we need to do is a client search. Should a client present and want to ask questions about your organization or show up for service, you always need to make sure that that client doesn't already have a file in the system. It's an important piece to understand because you don't want to duplicate records in the system. It causes lots of problems and headaches when it comes to merging those. So we do ask that you maintain a proper search when you're starting out. So that's what you're forced to do here, is to do a client search. And in this case, we're going to choose the client name, Mary Higgins. I don't think she's been to our organization, but I'm just doing a search here quickly, and I'm returned one result that may or may not be the client I'm working with. If I look at her first name, it's actually Mary Waters, but if I look at the last name at birth, it was a match. So it's possible that this is the same client, and just she presented with a different name the first time. So if that were the case, you'd want to use this existing file. But in this case, we're looking at the date of birth, and we say, oh, no, this is actually a different person altogether. I'm safe to go ahead and add a new client. So in this case, I'm going to click Add Client, and I'm brought to a new client information record where I can start filling out the required information. You'll notice red asterisks throughout Catalyst. Those denote required fields on the different screens. You will be required to complete all of the required fields on a particular screen before you can move forward in the system. It doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to save what you've got at a certain point, but in order to move beyond the client information to the next level of information, you would need to have all of that complete first. So I'm going to just start filling out a couple of the fields.
As Laura is doing that, I just want to talk a little bit more about the required fields, and that there is an available document in the knowledge base that Laura has showed you in the help desk that you can search for, I think it's under required fields. It's actually going to be a resource that we send you at the end of this training, and it explains each of the required fields and the definitions for it.
Great. Thanks, Deb. So I'll just point out I was able to save, if you were watching, just with some very basic information. I've got the site number in, a first name, a last name at birth, a date of birth, a gender, and I did put an address effective date in here. That's all that's required in order to actually start the file. You won't be able to save without some very basic information, such as what I've just shown you. But should I only have that information, I can start the file and then complete the rest of the required fields as I get that information. In this case, I'm going to say I've been given all of that information. I'm going to just point out something here. The city is a required field, and as well, the county is a required field, but you won't actually be able to type in the county field. It's dependent on what you put in the city. Now, if I do a search, sometimes it comes up in a different window, so just notice a new window has popped up, but it's actually in a different tab. I need to select the county, which the city resides in. I select that, and then notice it's populating here in the county field. That's an important piece to understand because you won't be able to move forward without this populating, but if you don't get that it's dependent on this field, you might get going around in circles. So I just wanted to point that out. And then a postal code is required. It's a good idea to find out the postal code rather than use unknown, because that again causes more problems down the road. If it truly is unknown, you can select unknown postal code here. But in this case, we're going to put an actual postal code in.
And I just want to also note that unknown really shouldn't be used if it is a no fixed address, so the client is residing in a shelter, truly doesn't have a fixed address. Right below the postal code, there's another box called no fixed address that we encourage you to check off. We do look at this as a data quality issue, and if there's too high of an unknown in the postal codes, because that information is used all the time by DATIS for reporting to LHINs, it will become a data quality issue, so we ask that you use no fixed address.
Yeah, it's easier to know this information going forward than to have to fix it going backwards. So it's good heads up for you. So at this point, I have filled in required fields. I'll actually point out, I'm going to scroll back up. You've got the ability on the Catalyst screens to expand or collapse all sections. It's a good idea to expand all if you're not that familiar with what's in each of the sections so that you can make sure you're not missing anything that is required. On the client information page, there are no other required fields in the collapsed sections, but as we get further into it, there are. I'll point out quickly before we go any further, you have the ability to save and enter entry services at this point. Entry services are those provided prior to the client actually being admitted, prior to them showing up for a program that you're funded for and being admitted to receive those services. So if they call in or show up and ask questions about the services you provide, they haven't actually agreed to come to the agency, you haven't registered them in any programs, but you do want to get credit for that time spent, and that's where you would use the entry services feature. If I were to click on that, it would take me to the activity log, and that's where the entry services are entered. I'm not going to go to the activity log right now, but we will demonstrate that in just a minute with an actual program activity. But I just want to point out that if you did have anything to log, you can do so right from the client information screen. So if I scroll down, I'm going past my expanded sections. I can actually now, well, let me just save, make sure I didn't miss anything that I saved. Once you save, everything gets collapsed again, so just to note that. I'll just quickly point out there are custom fields here. They are not something that everybody will have, but if you wanted to add your own custom fields, you can set up custom fields by client screen. So you would need to talk to a Catalyst system administrator to get that done, but that's an option. So scrolling down, I now am ready to admit the client. Let's pretend our client has come in, they've received some information about our agency, we've logged it as an entry service, the time we spent with them, and now they've actually said, you know what, I want to come to the agency, I'm ready to receive services. I want to select admission list. This takes us to the next level of information where we can actually start an admission on the client. So far, the client information is more like your telephone book. You've got that level of information, a little bit of, you know, client information really. So you've got their address and date of birth, etc. But you don't really have any admission information on them. So that's where this next piece comes in. I'll point out you've got the link here. Any blue underlined text is generally a hyperlink in Catalyst. That will take you back to the client information should you need to refer to something. And you'll notice here no admissions exist for this client. Well, we know that. She's new. She's never been admitted before. So we're ready to click Add Admission. I get a reminder here. I'm sure it's very small for you to read, so I'll read it out. You should update the referred on date, referral sources, referral agencies, city, postal code, and county on the client information screen before adding an admission. So this really doesn't apply because we've just filled that out and now we're ready to add the admission. But should this client have presented 2 years ago and then come back for a repeat admission, the information on her client information may have changed and you want to make sure that's up to date. So this is just giving you that heads up to go back and change it before going ahead with the admission, but we don't need to. We click OK. And we're brought to the admission information screen where we can again fill in all the required fields and any other information that the agency wants to collect, starting with the site number. I'll point out quickly before I start filling this all in, the client has not yet been admitted. I'm just starting to fill in the admission information, so I don't see any information about the client actually being admitted. I'll show you that once this client has been admitted. I'll show you the change in the status. So I'm going to start with today's date. I don't even know what date it is anymore.
I think it's the 11th.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm not so far off. So I'm putting it as well, she was referred on today. And now referring source is required. I could indicate a referring agency. This list would be unique to your organization if you wanted to track that information. An important piece to get right, if you will, is the client type. You want to select the client type that is most appropriate for this type of client. So in this case, this client is coming to our organization to receive addictions treatment, so the alcohol drug client type is appropriate. Should they be coming for gambling as well as addictions, I could select this one here. If it was simply gambling, I could select that. The other option is a family member. So if this person were a family member of somebody who was having addiction problems, I'd want to select one of the family member items. What you need to know is that if you do select a family member or even a non-MOH LTC client, the required fields beyond this one are no longer required. You don't need to indicate legal status. You don't need to indicate all of this other information because it's a family member and it's not required. So even though there's an asterisk, it's only required should it be a client and not a family member. So I'm going to keep going with the required fields here.
So while Laura's doing that, I'll just talk about a couple things. She'll point out as she goes through, there are additional save buttons on this screen. It's a very long screen, so we encourage you. It times out, I think, after 30 minutes, but it's important, especially if you happen to be talking to the client at the same time, to use the save buttons. Once that is done, the status at the top is actually going to change, and she's going to point that out right now. So as we've been saying all along, because this is a really critical point if you're new to using Catalyst, is that this admission is considered pending still because there's not a first funded program attached to it. Once that happens, which is the next step in the flow, that becomes an open admission, but for now the status is pending.
Great, thanks. I want to point out while I'm thinking of it that the presenting problem substances is a required field. You have the option to put up to 5. It's not required to put 5, but should I indicate another presenting problem substance, I would need to indicate a frequency. In the case of the first one, they're both required, but afterwards, if I don't put anything else, I'm fine, but I will need to put a frequency should I add another substance. And in addition to that, notice that in the substances used in the last 12 months, you need to select all that apply. So it's not just the presenting problem substances, but anything used in the last 12 months. So in this case, it knew enough to select what I had indicated had been used in the last 30 days. Tobacco I took off. To add to the selected substances, I just need to double click. So let's say the client used steroids. I've selected it here. I'm double clicking, and then it appears in the selected substances. Should I need to remove it, I do the same thing. I select and I double click and it's gone. Again, a save button here. I've just saved, but I'll keep going. I need to indicate whether gambling was identified as a problem. If I did identify it as a problem, I'd need to indicate a treatment plan. And the gambling activities engaged in the last 12 months. Again, you need to indicate any activities that were engaged in. They don't necessarily need to be problematic or considered problematic. So maybe the client played bingo or bought lottery tickets. You need to indicate these activities here in this field. It is required. If it were none, you can select that as an option. And then I'm going to keep going. There's a few more required fields, so just bear with me while I fill these out.
Sorry, Laura, I was answering the question. Did you talk about the gambling data form? If not, I'm going to speak to that.
Sure, you go ahead. I did not speak to that.
Okay. So if your agency happens to be funded for as a designated problem gambling agency, and the client is there for gambling identified as a problem, then there is a special form that is a link within that gambling section that needs to be filled in as a requirement. And if it doesn't get filled in, then you need to give the reason for not completing. But that is only applicable to agencies who are designated for problem gambling. Thanks, Laura.
Great, thank you. Great. So I've saved again. I've expanded all the sections just to see what else is left. One of the ones that often gets missed down here under prescribed drugs, it's the last of the required fields, so just pointing it out that it's in there. You'll need to indicate an answer and then save again. Notice there are several fields I'm not filling in here. These are available for your agency to collect data if you wanted to, but they're not all required, so just to keep that in mind. So I'm scrolling back down. I click Save. Notice again the status of this admission remains pending. Even though I've filled in all the required fields, it remains pending until I attach a program to the admission. So this client has been admitted. We've gone through all of the information on the admission information. I'm going to have to scroll to the bottom and click Programs. Programs is where we actually open a program that they are receiving treatment in. Again, I've got some links here. I can link back to the client information. I can link back to the admission information. And I've got some high-level information showing up at the top here. No program found for this admission. Well, we know that. This client is new, has not yet been opened into a program, so I need to click Add Program. I get a reminder the current client type is alcohol drug. If the client type is changed, please update it before you proceed to register the client into a program. So it's just a reminder, if you're about to put a client into a program that does not coincide with their client type, you'll want to update their client type. We click OK, and we're brought to the new program information screen. So again, a few required fields here. It's not nearly as long as the admission information. From the program information, from the program name drop-down box. Again, this is a practice database, so these are not going to be the programs you see. You're going to see a list of your agency's programs. You'll need to select what the program is that the client is receiving treatment in. You need to put a site number. Notice when I put the program in, the provincial service category as well as the functional center are automatically populated. These are grayed out. You cannot edit them. This is done behind the scenes when that program is set up. The program is mapped to a service category, which is how DATIS gets the information that they need to submit, as well as it's mapped to a functional center, which is how the OHRS report that we provide gets information tallied. So that's often used for LIN reporting. So it's just an important piece to understand the behind the scenes sort of setup that gets this information together. We need a start date for the program. Keep in mind it cannot be before the admission start date. It wouldn't make sense that the program would start before the admission, but it's just a rule that we've got in place. Now start time. It looks as though it's required, which it is, but it will automatically be populated with the computer time if you leave it blank. That might be of value to a WMS agency, so you'll want to use the start time, but otherwise you can leave it blank and it'll automatically fill in when you save. You can indicate a primary worker. You can indicate another referred on to the program date. But at this point, I'm just going to save my program. Sorry, there's a lot of custom fields on this screen. So I'm just getting a note about the wait list. We're not going to get into the wait list today, but this practice database is set to use the wait list. So you will get a notice to say, hey, did you want to indicate how long the client waited for this particular functional center? I'm going to say, I'm going to say cancel, so we're not brought to the wait list. And now we're brought back to the program list screen. We can see here that this client now has an open program, this one here, the substance abuse community treatment, in this admission number 1 for them. And notice their admission status has now been changed to open. It was pending up until the time we opened this program, but now it's considered open. They have an open program. They're actually receiving services. They're admitted to the agency. So I want to just stop before we go any further and see if there's any questions, and then we'll continue on with the process.
Yes, yes. So we have a couple good questions in, Laura, and on the chat. So
Okay.
I just wanted to address them out loud. So Betty's asked, can I add info later that we do not know at admission on the admission information screen? So I've responded back, but I just want to say that out loud, that the intent of the required field information, which were decided by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, was to capture this information at the time of the admission. You know, it's understood that sometimes, in particular clients maybe who may not be in a stable situation at the time that you are seeing them, that you may be able to gather that information afterwards. So, I mean, we don't tell agencies that it should be within a certain period of time, but our recommendation would be that it would be a very short period afterwards, that you're still, if you go to update it, that it's not, you know, anything more than maybe a week or two after that you're updating that information.
We recognize that the information is dynamic and it will constantly change. Everything from, you know, married to education or income source. It's a reflection of where the client was at the time of admission. So I guess we give you that to use your reasonable assessment of when you should be updating. But I, like Deborah said, I wouldn't wait too long to make the change to the information.
And we have a second question, and
Great.
that's from Kelly, and she is wondering if her agency is for drug and alcohol treatment, so they're not a designated gambling agency. The client identifies gambling issues. Do I identify client type as drug alcohol, as we are not a gambling agency? So the answer to that would be the client type should still be alcohol, drug, gambling. So gambling does get identified as problem. So the client type here would be changed. You're going to notice here the gambling identified as a problem actually gets updated and grayed out. And then you would need to select from the treatment plan drop-down list. And it may be that they're referred to a designated gambling agency, so that you're not actually providing the services within your organization, but they have been identified. You wouldn't need to fill in the gambling data form because you're not a designated agency, and you wouldn't need to fill in the reason for not completing the data form. So behind the scenes, we are tracking who's the designated gambling agencies. You could use that if you wanted to, if you wanted to do a further screen, but it would be important to identify them as an alcohol drug gambling client, even though you are not a designated agency. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, that was it for questions, Laura, if you want to go back to the program info screen.
Okay, great. So I'm still within this particular client file, so I just want to point that out that we haven't left. So I still have access to moving back to her programs. So I can do so by doing that. But let's pretend it's you know, a couple days after the client has filled in all their information. So I'm not actually in her file. I just want to sort of go through this process. You would look for the client by going client information and then client search, the same way we had to do before we could actually add her. And this way I'm going to do my search. I may know her chart file number at this point. I may not. I can just search by name if not. And again, I'm given two search results now because there's a new Mary Higgins. Okay, this is the one I'm looking for here. I can click on her name and I'm brought into her file. I'll point out a couple of things here. The chart file number has automatically been populated. Once a client has an admission, that chart file number, they're given the next available numeric value. So if 279 was the last admission, this one's automatically given 280. So just to keep that in mind. If somebody's account in Catalyst is an administrator account, they can override that. As you can see, I have the ability to type over that. If you're not an administrator in Catalyst, you would not be able to override that. So just to understand that if that's the situation for you. So I'm now on her client information. I want to go back to her program information. Let's say she's finished her program and I want to close the program. So I'd go to admission list and then I navigate to her programs. From here I can click on this and I'm going to go into her one program, substance abuse community treatment. And then I scroll down and I want to indicate an end date so that I can terminate the program. But what I have to notice before I can actually terminate a program, if I move down a little bit further, I can see the program service summary. So pre-admission services are excluded. So again, they are entered through the activity log, as I mentioned earlier, but only admitted services are counted here against the program, and I need to have more than a 0 value for the direct service time and the sessions before I can actually close the program. The way to do that is through the activity log. So what I need to do is actually scroll down from this particular program and add an appointment. If I was not in her program information screen, I could add the appointment in another way, and I'll point that out, but I'll just show that I'm already in her screen. So if I click Add Appointment, her program information gets automatically populated, which actually simplifies things for me. So I scroll down, and in the individual appointments only section, I've got all the information I need here. I've got her chart file number, her first and last name, the admission that this is associated to, and more importantly, the program that's getting credit for this particular appointment. So let's start at the top. I scroll back up. I need to indicate a service provider. Bear with us. It's a practice database with a lot of people in here. You probably won't have that many. I need to indicate the time spent with the client by the service provider. I could add a subsequent service provider should that have been the situation. Maybe there were 2 clinicians present during the appointment. You can add more. I mean, there's 4 listed here, but I believe you can add up to 10 or maybe 14. I forget how many more, but by expanding here, you can certainly add more service providers. I need to indicate the site that the appointment took place at. I could indicate, so this is the date that the appointment took place on. I could indicate a start time. Again, unless you're using it for a scheduler, not really that valuable. That comes down to the scheduled duration activity, or scheduled activity duration as well. If you're using this as a scheduler in advance, you'd want to put the scheduled duration as a placeholder, but in this case, the appointment's already taken place and we're just trying to log it and receive credit for it. The activity type, what did they receive? Well, it was a direct face-to-face with the client, and then I'm given the corresponding activities to choose from. Patient, sorry. Yeah, so there we go. And I need to indicate that it occurred. And then if I scroll down, I've already got the individual appointment information in here, and I can click Save. And I get a notice, the information has been saved. Okay, great. So I can click OK. And now I'm brought back to this particular screen where I could continue to add more appointments. It's no longer associated to that particular client and program, so I would need to pull up whomever I'm adding the appointment for. So let's pretend I'm actually going to exit out of here for just a second. Exit the activity log. And I'm brought back to this client's file, but I'm actually going to just go home to the main screen. And let's say the client had another activity we wanted to log, but we're not actually in their file. Another point of entry is to go from here, activity log, and click Add Appointment. And I would do the same thing I just did by providing a service provider and the time spent, etc., activity type, all of this detail. And then I would need to indicate who received the service. If I knew the chart file number, I could click Search. And it's automatically populated here. There's only one admission for this client, so it knows it's admission 1. And I need to select the program for which the appointment occurred. I'm not going to continue filling it all in, but once I did, I'd click Save, and that as well would be registered against that client and that program. So I'm going to cancel, and I'm going to actually exit from here. I'll just point out before I exit, I don't know if you can see this, but at the top, I'm actually in a different window. When I go into the activity log, it opens a new window in my browser. I just like to point that out because some people think that they are out of Catalyst, but you're not. You're still in Catalyst, but in a different window. If I click Exit, it closes that window, and I'm brought back to the last screen I was on in Catalyst.
We have a question, Laura, before you go
Sure.
from So Susan is asking, if two service providers are present and one worker enters the info, does it automatically appear on the other worker's activity list?
Yes. So if I were to have a service provider, maybe I did an appointment with Bill, and then as well myself, whoops. You know, depending on how much time was spent, maybe he was with the client 60 minutes, but I came in halfway through and I was 30. That's what will be logged, and their Bill's activity log, and if I go into his calendar, that appointment will be there. Am I understanding the question? Sorry.
Yeah, we'll see if Susan responds back, but just again to clarify, like, you would need to make sure that if you were the one doing the entry, that both service providers actually got listed with their time, so it gets allocated
Right.
to the two service providers. And then for the two service providers, it gets potentially, like, they both get credit and the client gets credit just once.
Right.
Correct? Like the client doesn't get your 60 minutes and your 30 minutes.
No,
They
no,
have
no,
a total
no.
of 90. They would get a total
Right.
of 60 minutes. And she says,
It's
yes,
smart
thank
enough
you.
to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to exit out of here. Okay, so we are still in a situation where we have not closed Mary's program. We added the appointment for her, so we should now be able to close it. So again, let's do a search for her so we get familiar with this. This time I know her chart file number. I'm just going to do a search for that. And it's only one result because there's only one. We can only have one chart file number. Let's hope. You got problems if you've got more than a duplicate of the chart file number. So I brought back to her client information screen. I scroll down. I click admission list. And from here I can access her programs. And I see the one program I'm ready to terminate. I click on it. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And notice now the program service summary is populated. I haven't provided any indirect service time, but I'm only required to indicate direct service time as well as a session. So that's in there. I should actually be able to terminate now. So if I were to put tomorrow's date, let's just say, and I will need to indicate a reason for termination. If the client completed the program, I select the very first item. If they did not complete the program, I can select anything below the completed program item. So basically what I'm saying is if they completed the program, there's one selection. If they did not, you need to indicate why they did not, and that's any of the other items. So if they're completing, you don't want to select anything below the other, this item here, completed program. So let's say they did complete the program. I selected that. I can scroll down past the custom fields. I click Save. And now notice this particular program is closed. The admission, however, remains open. So this is on purpose. I think there's some confusion here, and I just want to stop and point that out. It's possible the client could receive subsequent treatment, and so we allow you to do that by opening a new program and going through that process. And that comes back to the flow chart that Deborah was showing sort of at the beginning, where you've got the one admission and you could possibly have, you know, subsequent programs going on, concurrent programs happening. Once all of the programs have been run their course and been terminated, that's when you'd want to discharge the admission. So in this case, let's say that the client has finished all services they're going to receive at this time, and we're ready to discharge them. They're leaving the agency. So I can click back on her admission. I'm brought back to the admission information, and I can scroll to the bottom, and I can discharge. Before I do that, however, I want to make sure I've indicated any referrals that have happened for this client during the course of her treatment. I could have been indicating these along the way, but we're sort of doing this in a fast-forward kind of way. But if I had made referrals, I'd want to make sure I log those as I made them. I don't have to wait until I'm ready to discharge. I click the referrals button and I'm brought to the outgoing referrals list. And I can see here there are no outgoing referrals. I click Add Referral. And I've got a few options here. I can refer her to a participating agency. I can refer her to a non-participating agency. or I can do an internal referral. In this case, I'm going to start with a participating agency, and there's only one required field for a participating agency, and that's the service category they are being referred to. So in this case, maybe she wants to move on to a residential treatment organization, so I select that. If I had these populated, I could certainly select the agency that I was referring to if that's something your agency is interested in collecting. But the only other piece now required is the date. So I'm going to put tomorrow's date. Oops.
I'm just going to speak to Laura just so it's clear the difference between a participating agency and a non-participating agency. A participating agency is one that reports to DATAs, and those are all of the agencies funded in the province of Ontario for problem gambling and substance abuse by the LHINs. A non-participating agency are ones that are not funded for those functional centers. It has become very confusing and convoluted, so we will acknowledge that over the years since Catalyst was initially developed, in particular in organizations that are part of a multi-service organization. So if you were embedded in a large corporation and there's mental health services along with the addiction services, and you're referring to the mental health services, that's actually not a referral to a participating agency. If you're referring to the mental health portion of your large corporation, that would be a referral to a non-participating agency. It also wouldn't be an internal referral, and I know that's very confusing, but I did want to point that out.
So I'll use that as an example, Deborah, thank you. So I'm selecting refer to a service type. So these are standardized and they're provided for you. You can select one of them. If you had a specific agency that you refer to, you could have populated this list here with that. Oops, sorry. And select the corresponding place that you're referring them to. It's not required. The only piece that is here. And again, a date for when that referral was made. So once I've filled that in, I can scroll down and click Save. And notice I now have 2 referrals made for this particular client. I'm going to now go back, and this takes me back to the admission information screen, which is where I can actually do the discharge for the client.
So there's a good question in, Laura,
Sorry.
and I want to stop for it.
Okay.
And that is there a length of time that the file can be closed? But I think it means that like programs terminated, but the admission is kept open. So I just wanted to say that when we do our annual data quality reviews, and we do look at inactive admissions, and we do see that as very important, that we give it a 90-day window. That's just to allow, because we've been told by organizations that sometimes they like to leave files open for that 3-month period to ensure that the client isn't returning and they don't have to sort of reactivate the file. So from a data quality perspective and the way that we build our data quality analysis reports, we look at a 90-day window. You may choose that to be different in your organization, but that's sort of what we see as a standard.
And 90 days we feel is, as Deborah said, 30 days is sort of the running time that you'd want to leave the admission open without any open programs. So 90 days is 3 times that value. It's not that we're saying leave it 90 days. It's a real window that we're saying these are potentially problematic files. If they've been left, they've probably been forgotten. So that's why we chose 90 days. I just don't want it to be confused that that's the length of time that it should be left. Any other questions before I move on to the discharge?
No, that's good.
Okay, great. So again, we accessed the discharge information from the client's admission information screen. So we've finished all their programming, we've referred them out, we're actually ready to discharge them from the agency. Again, some required fields here. There are a couple business rules just with everything else. The discharge will have to be after the last activity, the last closed program. You can't have it outside of that time frame. Oops, I'm picking the wrong. And the timeout, same thing. If it was a WMS agency, you could put that in here, but not required. A reason for discharge is required, and again, it's the same idea as we showed you with the programs. The first item is that they completed their service plan. Anything below that is indicative that they did not complete their service plan, and you can select a reason why they didn't complete. So in this case, we'll say they did complete the service plan. I could enter any follow-up information in terms of their employment status, relationship status, etc. This would be outside of what they presented with at their admission stage, so you could make comparisons to that data if that's something your agency is interested in collecting. I'm going to scroll down. I've got the other information from their admission, and I'm going to click Save. Okay, so the gambling data form, because we indicated this was a client with a gambling problem, I'm actually going to go back. Deborah, I think you indicated it's not required because it's not a gambling agency. I think you still need to fill in the form. Well, no, you need to still fill in this, a reason for not completing the gambling form, or else you need to fill in the gambling data form. The client can get referred out and they don't need to receive gambling treatment at your agency, but we do need to indicate a reason if we don't fill in the form at our agency. So save that.
Still learning.
And you know what? Sometimes business rules change, so it's contact help desk if something doesn't look right. So now we're actually ready to discharge. I'm going to click discharge again and just fill out the information I started with.
Just to point out here, referrals, when we look at data quality issues, referrals is often a significant one where a lot of agencies are not putting referrals in. And so you will see on the discharge screen whether referrals have been made. Otherwise, you have to indicate that there's been no referral. So just really keep that in mind to try and encourage staff that referrals should be made. Unless you really are absolutely making no contacts for the client, there should be some kind of referrals in there.
So I'll just point out, now that we've discharged the client, the admission status has been changed to closed. So essentially this client is done. You can rest that they are no longer receiving services, the file's not sitting there open, there's no data quality issues coming up because it's inactive. Should they return, however, that's when you would want to change them from being closed in the admission status to adding a new admission. You wouldn't want to reopen this admission unless for some reason they presented, the next day and said, oh, I'm actually coming back and there was an error. You could delete the discharge. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretend it's a few months later. Mary's come back. I do a search as I would for any new client or presenting client. Is she in our database already? Maybe I'm new to the organization. I don't recognize her. Okay, Mary Hagan's date of birth. Oh, yep, this woman has been here before. I'm going to access her file by clicking on it. Notice her admission status still closed. I'd want to update anything on her client information that may have changed. And once I've done that, I can save it, and then I would go to her admission list. She's got this past admission, admission number 1. It's been terminated and discharged. I'm going to click Add Admission. Again, I get this reminder about referred on dates, referral sources on the client information. I've already updated all my client information. I click OK, and I'm brought back to a new admission information screen. So this is what Deborah was talking about in the flow chart at the beginning, where there was that parallel of the admission one with the programs below it, and then a new admission beside admission 2 with the programs below it. That's what we're doing here. We're starting this process all over again. We need to fill in the admission information. We'd want to attach a program, what they're receiving. We'd want to add the activities to the activity log, any services that they received, indicate any referrals that were made for the client, and once they've completed, you'd terminate the program and then discharge the admission.
I think maybe also wanted to point out that when you were on the screen for readmission, there's the capability to copy and add an admission. The reason that is there is mainly for residential withdrawal management organizations who have clients that are coming back within the same 24-hour period. So you know nothing really has changed, and it's going to repopulate all the same information. It's not something that we recommend for just a regular readmission. Otherwise, the data quality can be compromised because it gets repopulated with everything, and if something has changed, it may not get updated. So we do encourage you just to add a new admission. But if you are an RWMS, you could use that copy and add admission. So no other questions in right now, Laura.
Okay.
Good. Before I go back to just our last couple of slides, could you go back to the DATIS Help Desk and so that we can point out and promote our DATIS campus so that people know where the recordings are for the training? Great. So right here on back, we clicked on the link, went into the DATIS Help Desk, the DATIS campus where you would have registered for this training. There's a link directly there. If you're a CSA, there is a link directly within the help desk if you're actually logged in. So the DATIS campus is something over the last few months we put a lot of time and effort into. What we really want to point out is, yes, you will get a recording from today's training, but all of the trainings, including this, the CSA training, other trainings that we've given in the past are available from here that you can listen to at any time, or you can direct staff, new staff that you want to get an update on, to go in and listen to one of these recorded trainings. You have to register, but as soon as you get registered, if you've registered before, the link will come up and it will start to play for you. So please, we really encourage you that you start using that and access those links at any time. Great, thanks, Laura.
Great.
So
Thank you.
I am just going to go out of here and bring us to our last few slides. We're approaching the end of our training here. So we have talked about a lot of things today. This is a basic training, as we've noted many times, but we have indicated that there are other pieces within Catalyst that are sort of at an advanced level. We didn't talk about case notes, but case notes, there is electronic case notes that are available, and there will be a link in your resources that will send you on electronic case notes. The waitlist module is available. We have the electronic referrals. Supplementary forms is basically a form that can be set up with an extensive amount of custom fields. There are some that are pre-set up for research projects such as the Supportive Housing Initiative and the Methadone Initiative that is managed by DATIS, but your organization, oops, my slides are jumping around on me, can also use the supplementary forms, and you can contact Help Desk to get further information on that. In addition to that, all the standardized assessment tools, the DAT tools, are available electronically within Catalyst, and again, we will include information on that on our resources.
Deb, can I just stop you there? Sorry, we've got a couple questions in. I thought it would be better to swing back to those before going any further.
Absolutely.
So we've got one here. Is there a way to track travel time? So I think that goes back to using the activity log. I don't know if I need to go back or not, but basically you've got the option of a client direct service, which is what we demonstrated when we added that appointment. You could also do a, what's the one, indirect service that you would set up. So you, instead of the client or the activity type being client direct, it would be indirect, and you could indicate the amount of time spent, and your agency would want to add an activity, and anybody with administrative privileges in the database could do that. You'd want to add a travel time activity against indirect services, and then you could use the activity log to log that. So I hope that answers. If it doesn't, certainly post a question to our help desk and try it out, and hopefully that will get you going. And then Betty's asked, what if clients phone in for an intake but don't attend? Again, you can use the activity log to indicate that. You would just indicate did not occur. So there is a, I don't know if I should just go back. We've got a minute. Let me just quickly go back, because I think these are important questions and you're not that familiar, and I don't want to direct you without actually seeing. Just give me 1 second here. So we're back. You guys see Catalyst again, hopefully?
Yes,
I'll just jump. Great. I'll just jump to the activity log. So the first question had to do with the activity type. So there is client indirect. The activity will need to have been added to your database. That's an agency-specific list, the activity list. So if you had travel time, well, here's this one here in this particular list, you could put that here, and you'd want to indicate, you know, I drove for 20 minutes to get to see the client. I'd still need to indicate who the client was, because it's going against their particular file. I'm not going to do it because I don't have a client that I know I can add this to. It needs to be an open client. But that's how you would get credit for that time spent, even though you're not actually with the client. That's an indirect service. And then, Betty, your question had to do with...
so she said, what if clients phone in for an intake but don't attend? And then she came back with, don't you need minutes? But when it's not occurred, so if you've done an intake, you've scheduled the appointment, but they didn't show up, then the activity status actually becomes not occurred, which is, we hadn't showed an example of this, and you don't need the minutes for that. And you can indicate, as Laura showed in the activity comments, that it's a no-show. Hopefully that answers your question, Betty. Okay, good. I'm going to take back and wrap things up here so that we are promptly on time. So that's it for today. There were some really, really great questions. It's really great for us to see people participate, get questions. The questions were really, really good, things that I think help us realize what's really important to point out too. We are excited to announce that we have 2 new trainings. This is the end of the client basic flow for it, at least for now. That's why the recordings are available, so they can be listened to at any point. We are releasing, you should receive a notice, or your directors and or CSAs within your organization will be receiving a notice by the end of the month of 2 new trainings we are offering. One is on reports and data monitoring, and one is on the DATA's OHRS report. We'll probably only be offering them once, but so there'll be no limits on those trainings, but they will be recorded and will be posted. So as we've said many times, today's recording is, we have recorded today's training. You'll get a link within about the next hour. Within the email that we'll be sending you, there's going to be a link to the recording. There's also a participation survey, which is really important if you have a minute to fill in for us. That really does guide us on what we need to do to change our trainings, whether they're helpful or not. So if you could fill that in, that would be great. And then you'll also get a link to a document that has all the resources that we've talked about today. Then there are links to the knowledge base. So I think that's it. We are at 2:30. And I think that's it for the day. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the training and found it valuable.
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody. And thanks for the great questions. As Deborah pointed out, it helps us to know what we need to be responding to and giving information about. So I thought that was great.